Podcast 193, take 2.
John Huff Podcast.
Somewhere out there, today, this is Manic Monday as I take a second shot at recording this anecdote. But for you, it might be Wednesday or it might be a Thursday 5 years hence. But somewhere out there, there's a woman, my intuition says it's a woman, and she's telling the story of being on the 401 highway westbound and stopping at a 401 highway en route truck stop and going to the Tim Hortons and ordering a green, possibly peppermint tea with 2 sugar, possibly 2 sweetener, and then getting her drink and getting into her car and setting wheels once again upon highway destined for Windsor, destined for Detroit maybe, to her niece's wedding or a bar mitzvah. And she pops the top on her drink and she takes a sip and nearly chokes and spits it out on the highway, realizing that instead of a sip of a green, possibly peppermint tea with 2 sugar, possibly 2 sweetener, she is drinking a no sugar milk latte. And that is disturbing for her. And I know she had that reaction, okay, because that is the precise reaction I had when I set wheels on the highway destined for Windsor. And I popped the top on my drink, and instead of a sip of a no sugar milk latte, I took a sip of a green, possibly peppermint tea with 2 sugar, possibly 2 sweetener, and I nearly choked and spat it out on the highway. Now, it was my own fault. It was my own fault because I ordered the coffee from the Tim Hortons, and then I stood around waiting, and then there appeared in the little space beside the cash register a medium-sized coffee in a cup. And Ken the Zen nodded and said, "Is that you?" And there didn't seem to be anybody else around. So I'm like, I guess it must be me. Nobody called out what it was that I could hear. So I picked it up and I walked away. And I hope nobody sues Tim Hortons. I'm tempted. My own fault. I was perhaps impulsive. I was perhaps not paying attention. Was not drinking the no sugar milk latte that I was expecting. And I got to tell you, all right, sometimes a thing happens like that and it comes as a happy accident, right? You get what you were not expecting to get. You get what you were not ordering. And then you try it and you're like, this is a revelation to me. This is the most delicious thing I've ever tasted. I will drink this henceforth. Did not happen in this case. I took a sip of that green, possibly peppermint tea and looked at Ken the Zen and said, this is awful. And it was. All right, I can drink tea, right? In fact, I have a lemon ginger tea that I drink regularly during the wintertime here around my little studio. And I can drink a regular good old-fashioned English tea, all right, with nothing in it, right? No milk, no sugar. I can drink the tea. I've had a lot of green tea in my life. I lived in Japan, for crying out loud. All of those teas, especially your green, your peppermint, with some sort of sweetener in them, 9. Nicht so gut, all right? Does not taste great. Ist nicht so lecker. Don't dig that. Drank it anyway because I wanted myself a drink as I was motoring with Ken the Zen along the highway towards Windsor town for what turned out to be a really, really fun and compelling gig. Call it a gig, and technically it was, but it was part of a charity thing, okay? So here's what happens. Every year in W-Town, a cat called Jeff Burrows, who you will know better as the drummer from The Tea Party, platinum-selling Canadian iconic rock band The Tea Party, They're Windsor band, or they were. Burroughs still hangs around Windsor, right? And every year, Burroughs does a 24-hour drum marathon. Some of you listening right now have probably participated in that. I had not before. This was the first time that I'd had a chance to do it, right? What happens is Burroughs he used to do 24 hours straight playing the drums for charity, raises a lot of money for very good causes around the area, and that's cool. I think now he breaks that into 2 12-hour chunks. He'll do a Friday, he'll do a Saturday, something like that. Very cool. And the way he does this is that he has bands come in, he has artists come in to play a couple of sets, and he plays along with them. And in so doing, gets himself through 24 hours of playing the drums. Very ambitious, gotta be hard to do, especially back in the full 24-hour stretch days. Man, even with good technique, and he has it, your hands, your shoulders, your feet, your brain, it must become so tiring, right? So what happened this time around is that Fresh Breath, with whom I play, was chosen as one of the bands to be part of this gig, okay? And so Ken the Zen and I trundled down to W-Town to join Fresh Breath, Josh, Katie, Brett, get the gang together, do a couple of sets of music, right? And I've never done this before. Now, those guys have either done this before or they have been involved in shows where they have met and hung out with Burroughs. And so they know him, he knows them. For me, brand new. I know people who have done this in the past. My bands have never been part of it. It's kind of like you need maybe a Windsor-Essex connection. I'm not sure. Fresh Breath certainly has that. I know Sarah has done it many times, Ken the Zen with her. And so they have an experience of this, but I am walking into this somewhat blind, and it's a really strange position for the drummer to be in because Burroughs is a drummer. And so right off the hop, you're going down, and what's the drummer going to do who's in the band that's playing if Burroughs is playing the drums, right? Bit of a strange situation for me, and I wasn't quite sure what I was going to get into. I have a certain luxury because I sing a lot of backup vocals, all right? So normally what happens, I think, is the drummer from whatever band is playing will do some percussion or whatever, play some shakers, maybe a djembe. I don't know what they do. They play some percussion. In my case, I was like, okay, set me up a microphone. I'll sing the backups. I'm comfortable doing that. I got my rock moves. I can be one of the freaking Supremes. I've done it before. Fine, cool. For me, the real value here was not so much in playing the drums, which I did wind up doing at a certain point. It was, first and foremost, a band exercise, right? A band needs time spent together, right? Fresh Breath, as we've established, is fundamentally Josh and Katie Pascoe, right? The husband and wife dream team, and they tour around being Fresh Breath mostly as a duo full time. When opportunity allows, they bring in the band, all right? That's Ken the Zen, that's me, that's Brett, and that doesn't happen a lot. And so for us, we don't get the kind of time that a lot of bands get to just gel and be together in situations, right? That's very important for a band. A band needs connections off stage, all right? It adds to the comfort level on stage to have comfort level off stage. And we do have that, but we don't have as many opportunities as a lot of regularly gigging bands to just kind of spend that time together, develop those relationships, develop that comfort. And so for me, I'm looking at this like, well, there's every possibility that we'll go and Fresh Breath will play for 2 hours, and I won't play the drums at all because, again, it's a drum marathon for the drummer from the effing Tea Party, for crying out loud. This is a platinum-selling rock band, okay? Dude's got it covered. But for me, an exercise in just being with the band, right? Spending that time, that crucial on and off stage time with the band. It's very, very important to develop those relationships. And you see bands come apart, right? You see bands that reach a level where they hate each other so much that they travel in separate buses. And isn't it the dream, kids? Isn't it the dream to reach a level of success where you can hate your bandmates and be able to afford separate buses from them all. That is the land of milk and honey, my friends. I jest. I'm a kidder. But bands that don't like each other off stage have a great deal of trouble, in many cases, making it work on stage. Sometimes the musical chemistry is so robust and so kinetic that it still works anyhow, and they all recognize that. It's like, I could be on stage with you for a couple of hours because the music works so well. But when we get off stage, I want you out of my line of sight, Jack, okay? Pink Floyd comes to mind. I just feel like, in my experience, having those relationships with people translates to the stage, to a comfort level, to an understanding, to a way of being able to communicate physically and musically. And it's just important for a band to have good times together. Sometimes, it's also important for bands to have not so good times together, as long as they're having those times together. All right, it can't be a case where we're having a lousy time right now because one or two people in the band are a-holes and they're making this a bad time. But a band can come together very quickly. A band can build tight bonds in rough, what we call chicken wire scenarios, right? If you're experiencing that together as a collective, if there is an us against the world kind of vibe, that can also bring bands together. But very important to have good times together. And so that's a very long way of saying, I wanted to go do this thing, even though I might not even get to do much of anything, just to be part of the band, right? It was a band thing, and I'm part of the band. The other side of this, the corollary, the other perk, the other real motivation and incentive is to be in proximity to somebody who's playing at the level of Jeff Burrows. Like I said, this is the freaking Tea Party, man. When you go and you put together the list of the top X number of Canadian rock bands, the Tea Party is on that list, okay? This is an iconic band. This is a lot of people's favorite band. And in Europe and in Australia, this is a band that has done it and continues to do it at the highest level. Big radio hits, big sales, big tours. This is the highest freaking level, man. And Burrows, Jeff Burrows, everybody I know who knows him calls him Burrows, and so that's why I'm using that. It's not a disrespect thing. It's just, as far as I know, my understanding is that within the scene, that's how he's referred. We'll call him Jeff Burrows. Call him Mr. Burrows if you like. This is a drummer playing at that level. And here's my bit of insight for all you kids out there. Spend as much time as you can in proximity to, on the carpet beside, people at a higher level than you, and when you get the chance, people at the very highest level, people at the level you would want to get to, right? And one of the great things about music is that if you hang around it long enough, you are afforded opportunities to watch those people up close, right? And I've had those opportunities because playing in bands that are on festivals, and that gets you backstage, that gets you on the stage, side stage, to watch bands like July Talk, for example, which I've done, or watching Steven Tyler from 10 feet away on the stage and being able to watch Sarah Tomek play the drums. I'm always personally fascinated by all of the mechanics of that, but as a drummer, as a musician who still has dreams of improving and has much improving to do, you can sit down so close to somebody who is playing at that level that you aspire to, or maybe even levels beyond that, or levels beyond where you think you're capable of getting. And so for me, it's like, wow, let's have a chance here to be on the stage with somebody like Jeff Burrows and to watch this guy play, right? To watch how his hands operate, to watch the economy of his movement, to watch his foot if I can get an angle on it, right? To pay attention to his musical choices, the fills that he makes. I mean, 90% of what he's going out there to play is going to be stuff that he is either completely unfamiliar with or is only vaguely familiar with, right? So the first set that Fresh Breath did was wall-to-wall covers. All right, now they are classic rock covers, right? They are 70s covers. They are songs that we all know, but we may not know the drum parts for those, right? And so this becomes an interesting thing. Watching somebody like Burroughs, again, this is not a disrespectful naming. This is what I understand people call him. Watching somebody like Jeff Burroughs come into a song that we all know but might not know the drum parts, and just watch how he approaches that, what his choices are, how he listens. This was the thing that I was noticing, and I notice it among really good players, especially really good players kind of caught in a jam. I don't mean caught in a fix, but caught in a situation where people are jamming, is really paying attention to who he's watching and how closely he's watching. And he was the whole time, right? We're doing covers with Fresh Breath. I'm singing backups, which gives me a lot of time. Gives me a lot of time to scope things out, man, because I might not sing anything except one line on a chorus. And then I sit there for a minute and 30 seconds waiting for that to come around again. It gives me a lot of time to look around. And so I'm watching Burroughs, watching other people. And this is the thing, all right? This is another piece for you kids out there. Pay attention to the other musicians on the stage, especially if you are in a situation where you're not super familiar with the song. Watch people for cues, right? Pay attention as a drummer to the bass player. Watch where the singer's going. Watch whoever seems to be the band leader for directions on where this song is going to go. And it's really interesting to watch a dude at that level, just like everybody else, watching, looking at just watching his hands, watching the way he grips the stick. I've said this before, that I went to see Death Cab for Cutie one time in L-Town. I've seen them several times, but this time in particular, we were right up close, first row. And I could watch Jason McGurr, one of my favorite and one of the most influential drummers for me. I could watch him, and he's a master of technique. I could watch him from 20 feet away in an arena, but I was that close. And I had such a vantage point that I could see his hands working. I could see his posture. I could see his arm and wrist movement, his grip. And I left that space a better drummer just because that leached into me. I adopted, at least briefly, a similar kind of posture, a similar kind of grip. And you can only get that, I think, from being in proximity. It's why you go take lessons from people who are better than you. Because quite apart from what they're teaching you, by osmosis, you pick up that technique, that grip. You watch it, you absorb it. Saw that with Jason McGurr. Saw that with Jeff Burroughs, right? I watched the way his hands go. I watched the very fluid way in which he worked his way around the drum kit. This is another thing that I notice about professional players. And when I say pros, I don't mean people who get paid to play. All right, that is one technical definition of a pro. By that standard, I'm a pro. But we all know I'm not a pro. We all know in terms of my ability, we're not a pro. And so when I talk about professionals, I'm talking about a standard of playing. I'm talking about a level of ability. I don't consider myself to be a professional drummer. I consider myself to be a working drummer. And for me, you know, Billy Joel would write a song about a working drummer in Allentown. You know what I mean? That's the kind of lunch paler approach I take to the game. But when I watch a legitimate professional player, one of the things I notice is this fluidity and this consistency in their playing, and particularly their fills, all right? Now, lots of people can do a roll, 16th notes around the toms, and land on one. But a lot of times with people who are not professionals, by the definition I'm using, it's like that roll will start really strong, and then it will kind of peter out in terms of its volume by the end. Or it might not be just 100% in time, like all of the strokes may not be in time. They may land on one, but it might be kind of a ragged fill around to get there. Whereas a professional player will just hit that roll and it'll be the same volume on the snare as it is on the floor tom by the time they get there. And those notes will be spaced perfectly. And there's a completion in that fill. I think that's the word I'm going for. They will complete that fill in just a very fluid way, in a very articulate way, where the notes are all perfectly spaced and at the same intensity. It does not peter out at the end. It's there at the end, and then they hit the one, right? These are just the subtle things that I notice. I notice a pro's backbeat, right? There is a certain confidence and authority in a professional player's backbeat. Those of you who are not drummers, a backbeat is just simply the snare hitting on 2 and 4 or wherever the snare lands. The way that a pro will hit a snare drum with this authority and with this confidence, there is a presence. All right, there is a presence and a fluidity in a professional drummer. Maybe as a guitar player, you have your own models for this. You can just watch the way in which a pro guitar player bends notes or lands on notes or chooses notes, and the fluidity with which people like that play a solo or rhythm. You think of James Hetfield's rhythm playing, and it's just rock freaking solid, man. There is just a presence in his playing, and there is among professional drummers, even if they are not professional high-level touring drummers, even if they're just local gigging players, but you can just sense that quality in their playing. And it's this fluidity and it's this presence, and you find it in their backbeat. Whenever I see a band go up, I might be on a show with some bands I don't know, and I'll see the drummer go up and maybe sound check or whatever, and you can just tell when that player hits the snare drum that they've got that kind of intangible thing that is a confidence and it's a presence. And I try to cultivate that. I'm not sure I've got there. I really can't judge my own playing. I have other people tell me that I'm a good player. Sometimes that's just people being nice. I don't know. I can't really measure my own playing. I can measure somebody like Jeff Burrows when I watch the way his hands work, the way he grips the stick, this real economy of movement, right? I know that a lot of us grow up with this idea of a kind of flamboyance in the drummer, right? Who is our model for the modern drummer? It's Animal. It's Animal from the Muppets, okay? Who's coming at you with just arms flailing, hair flailing, and that is the spectacle, okay? And I get it. You need to do that if you're in a band like that. When I was playing in Hearts, my neck would hurt for days after a gig because I was moshing the whole time, flailing my hair around, because that is part of the visual spectacle of a rock show. But there's not a lot of economy of movement in playing the drums that way. And so when you watch a player, like in the studio, for example, I don't think some of those crazy visual rock players play the same way in the studio. You know, there's an economy of movement. The motions are very small. Now, Jeff Burrows was playing deliberately, quietly, okay? He was pulling back just for volume in that room. Again, that's a sign of a pro. Playing the room, being sensitive to volume, being sensitive to levels, how that all fits together with the overall package musically on the stage. That's just savvy, right? But I could watch his wrists working. I could watch the fluidity with which he got around the kit. I could listen to the choices he made. Did some tasty ride cymbal stuff. You know, he could have, because this is a Jeff Burrows show, and it's his name on the poster, and it's all about him playing the drums, he could very easily have done the show-off thing. I don't know if maybe he would have felt an obligation to do that, but this is another thing that I gather and that I pick up about professional players, is that most of them feel no need to demonstrate their prowess. Right? Like a lot of players, it's very easy to say a lot of younger players, because it is a maturity thing and it's an experience thing. But you will run across a lot of younger players or less experienced players who feel the obligation to demonstrate their prowess for you at every opportunity. especially if they get on the stage with a Jeff Burrows sitting there, feel the obligation to impress. But a pro who is rock solid in his or her foundations and knows what they have and is confident in the way they do things doesn't really feel the need to demonstrate that all the time. And he could. Now, maybe, devil's advocate, maybe he's recognizing he's got 24 hours of drums to play and he needs to just keep his energy levels, I don't think it was that. I think a pro just knows, once in a while we'll drop a tasty fill. Once in a while we'll drop a little, ride cymbal lick. And that's just fun and that's cool, right? And that's part of the show as well. But he could be just chopping out the whole time because he's got that in his locker. Doesn't. And he doesn't need anyone to walk away from that whole experience saying, man, that guy's a killer player. What a monster. I don't think he needs that. He's Jeff freaking Burrows. He plays in the Tea Party. He's a platinum selling drummer. Doesn't need anybody's pat on the back for being great. Or at least doesn't need anybody's pat on the back for demonstrating greatness in the way somebody like that would recognize it. Right? Now, I can recognize greatness in a more subtle way. I'm not saying I can achieve it, but I can recognize that his ability to lay back, to not be flashy, right? To let the performers on the stage have the spotlight, even though his name is on the poster. Right? This is all a confidence thing. This is all a professionalism thing. And for me, one of the really exciting things about being able to go and do this show finally, because again, this has been going on for years and I've just never had the opportunity to be a part of it. Being able to watch a player at his level do the thing, right? And how he does it and how he plays and what you can pick up. And then I finally got the chance to sit behind his kit, right? Because the second set, Fresh Breath did a handful of original songs and Jeff graciously gave the kit to me, which is very kind of him and I appreciate that. And so we're playing through those songs and I'm sitting on his kit and it's set up different from mine, right? He sits lower, his hi-hat is higher. I almost immediately dropped a drumstick because the hi-hat's not in the right spot. It's not there. It's not where I'm used to it. And that happens all the time, right? This is one of the hazards of playing a backline kit or playing somebody else's kit, which you have to do all the time as a drummer. Almost never does a guitar player have to play somebody else's guitar, which is set up differently or has different intonation or feels different in the hands. They never have to do that. Drummers have to do it all the time, right? And there are two courtesies to observe. If you're the person supplying your drums for like a 4-band night, you offer the courtesy of letting people move stands around or raise heights or lower them for their set. You offer that courtesy as part of the collegiality of the game. And then the other courtesy is, to the extent that you can, as the drummer coming into that kit, you say, we'll just leave it as it is. These two courtesies, and they play off against each other, right? And so it was. It's like I'm not touching any of Jeff Burrows' heights. I'm not moving a single thing, right? Beautiful drum set. It was like a Ludwig kit. Really, really pretty. Older one. Really, really nice. But again, sitting down. Okay, how does he tune, right? How do his toms sound? His snare was freaking incredible, by the way. How does he sit? He sits low. How is the spring tension on his pedal, right? Feels a little bit like mine. His hi-hats are set up differently. It's just fun to sit behind, again, somebody's kit who's playing at that level and see what's different, see what's the same, see what might work differently. I can't sit as low as he does. My back won't do it. I sit much higher than most people do because I got long freaking legs and a lower back problem, right? Very gracious of him to allow me to sit on his drum set and play for a while. And he grabbed a shaker and he stood where I had been singing. And so we played some Fresh Breath songs and there was just a moment. Sometimes I do this, right? I was doing it a little bit when I was doing the backup vocals in the first set, because again, I had a lot of time to just look around. And there was a thought that flashed through my mind that was like, life is weird sometimes, isn't it? I mean, who am I? I'm just a dude and I'm standing on a stage singing backup vocals for this band. I was like, how did I get here? I do a lot of this how did I get here stuff. which is compelling because that's the name of a Fresh Breath song, but that's completely separate from this conversation. Great song, How Did I Get Here? And I had a moment again where in the second set, I'm playing Fresh Breath stuff on Jeff Burrows' kit, and he's standing right beside me, and it just flashed into my head for a moment. I don't know if the other people in Fresh Breath have this realization now. They've perhaps had it before, but they've done this before, right? For me, it's novel and it's new, and I'm like, just flashed into my head. I'm playing the drums right now, and standing beside me is the drummer from the freaking Tea Party, and I'm playing his drums, and he's looking at me, and this is wild. What an interesting thought. It's like, wow, that's cool. And then I went back to doing my thing, and I was pleased with myself to the extent that I'm ever pleased with myself. I was pleased just a little bit that I could have that moment and then just go back to doing what I do. Like neither did I feel this obligation to demonstrate in some way some prowess. You know, I've reached a level of maturity as a human and as a musician where I can just do my thing and be confident in what I'm doing, and it works for the songs that I'm playing. The end, right? And then they ended with a couple of covers. I gave the kit back to Jeff Burrows because he's Jeff freaking Burrows. And so it ended. And what an interesting experience to have. You know, I want to commend Jeff Burrows for doing this. He's raised a lot of money over the years running this thing, and I want to commend him for giving local players the chance to come up and perform with him and be part of that. I want to thank him for being so gracious as to let me sit down on his drum set and play, and for being very encouraging about that. I was reminded again of this desert island thing that I talk about. This notion of what's your tribe? What's your tribe? And it was brought to my memory a couple of times over the past week. I was listening to the most recent, I think, episode of the Fly on the Wall podcast. That's Dana Carvey and David Spade talking to a lot of Saturday Night Live alumni. And they had Jerry Seinfeld on this week because Seinfeld's got that Frosted, Unfrosted, that new movie he's got out about cereal, which I'm going to watch. And so he's doing the rounds. And so he wound up on their podcast and they're talking about it. And again, I had this observation of tribes because I'm listening to those three guys talking to each other, three comedians, right? That's a tribe. And the comedy tribe to me seems very, very closed, right? And so I'm listening to those guys talk, and they're talking about comedy, and they're talking about stand-up, and they're talking about bits, and they're talking about comics they like, and they're talking about what works and what doesn't work. And Seinfeld says, you know, if somebody's not funny, not even a comedian, if somebody in real life, people are not funny, I'm just not interested. I want nothing to do with people who aren't funny. Now, you can read a certain arrogance into that, and, you know, Seinfeld's been accused of that kind of an arrogance before. I'm not judging either way, but it was like, if you're not funny, I'm not interested in you. And there's this kind of general chorus of agreement around that. And this is why I say the comedy world seems very closed to me. It's like there's some sort of rite of passage, you know, there's some sort of gauntlet you have to run to be entered into that world. But what was really strange for me is that anytime I see a group of comedians gathered together, I mean the highest level comedians, and they're talking about comedy because that's what they do. Like, comedy is very much, it's a way of life for those folks. Like, I really recognize a passion, a commitment to it in some of those people that makes it more than just a profession or a thing they do. Like, comedy is kind of what they are. And so they'll talk and they'll be throwing bits back at each other, back and forth. And they'll be laughing their heads off. And almost 100% of the time, I won't find those things funny at all. Right? Like, it tends to be these really sort of silly or inane jokes or premises that these high-level comedians find really, really funny. And it's like the last thing you ever want to try to do is sit in a circle like that and be funny, because what it is that they find funny is utterly different from what I think the rest of us find funny. So it's compelling to watch comedians riff with each other. But 9 times out of 10, whatever it is that they find hilarious, I think the rest of us are like, what? I don't get it. Like there's something in that psyche, right? And so you're stuck in this position where if you're not funny, they don't want anything to do with you. But what they find funny is not funny to the rest of us. That's probably how you know you're not a comedian, or that at least is not your tribe, right? It's like, I can laugh at you when you're doing your stand-up set because maybe you make it such that we lay people kind of get it. But what you find funny amongst yourselves is just really strange to me. And so it's like, yeah, another example of I don't really fit in that comedian tribe. But then Seinfeld said something else, which kind of underlies my point. He said, anytime he goes to a party, he walks in the room and he will make a beeline for whatever comedian he can find. As soon as he walks in the room, he's like, where's my tribe? Where's a comedian? I don't care if I know the comedian. I don't care if it's a good comedian. I don't care at all. Just stand me beside a comedian because that's where I'm comfortable and that's my tribe. And I say all of that because Fresh Breath arrives, right, at the venue, which is a restaurant, bar restaurant, for the Jeff Burrows Drum Marathon. And we sit down and, we're having a pitcher. And Burroughs was playing with some people. They're doing some blues. It was fun. And then they finished and he came off the stage and he comes right over to the Fresh Breath table. And it's hugs for Katie and Josh. And it's, hey, Ken, good to see you. And it's like, right? That's the tribe. That's the music tribe. It's like this dude is playing and he's done all the things. Platinum selling, touring all over the place, right? An international following. He's done all the things. And when you encounter him in that way, you're just, we're all just musicians, right? It doesn't matter about levels. It doesn't matter who's here, who's where. It's just like this tribe. We're musicians and we fit together. And there's a certain comfort level in that. I understand what Seinfeld is saying, I kind of feel, in a weird way, I kind of feel the same, sit me down with some musicians. It's like where I feel like I belong. And it's just a reinforcement, I guess, of this idea of kind of what are you meant for can sometimes be illustrated by the tribe in which you feel as though you belong. It's just a bit of a different way of looking at things, right? Seinfeld, if you're not funny, don't even come around me. Guess I don't fit there. And I certainly don't fit riffing with comedians because where they go and what they think is funny is alien to me a lot of the time. But then somebody at the level Jeff Burrows is at can see a table of us, and it's not a talent thing. It's not anything like that. It's just kind of his status would afford him the opportunity and perhaps the justification to not have anything to do with anybody in that room, right? Because I'm the drummer from the Tea Party, right? And I find over and over and over and over and over again that musicians are just not like that. And I don't know. I don't want to say we're the best people on earth. I was reluctant to even say we at that point because I still struggled to place myself in that world. It's very weird to me, and I have my own neuroses and my own self-consciousness, right? But it's just really interesting to watch a tribe of musicians get together. And I see this if I'm playing on an indie show, which we did recently. I see it if I'm in the room with somebody who's a platinum selling artist. I see it where I go. This sort of, we're all just musicians, man. Some people play 10,000 seaters. Some of us don't, at least not yet. But it's like this tribe exists. And it was fun to watch that with reflection or in the context of Jeff Burrows doing this thing, right? And he's very gracious. And a lot of the people in that room are his friends and family and stuff, right? So there's a whole kind of campfire vibe about it all. There's no pressure in this gig whatsoever. It's a great laugh. And watching him have a good time playing the drums and interacting with the people on stage. Very humble. There's no ego happening there. It's really gratifying when you run across that. And I run across that when I run across it, which I do from time to time. I very rarely see anything that isn't very humble. I remember opening for the Headstones with Hearts in a packed house, and what a fun night that was. And after the gig, drummer's breaking down his stuff. I go up, we're having a chat, right? He's playing with the freaking headstones. And, it's just chatting about drums. I can remember opening for Finger 11. And just before Finger 11 was going to go on, I was standing kind of at the back of the stage with Steve Malella, the drummer from that band, just talking about his drums, And it's like there was none of this sort of we're higher than you because you're the opener. It was just, hey, we're drummers. We're musicians. We're players. We're all part of the club. But I don't feel like that club is restricted to people. I feel like it's very open. And I've always appreciated that about music. And I'm beginning to babble. But all of that just to say, somebody drank my freaking latte. And I'm going to sue Tim Hortons about that. I know what you're waiting for. I know you're waiting with bated breath. I want to thank Jeff Burrows, by the way. That was a really fun day, and he was very gracious. And thank you, Josh and Katie and Fresh Breath, for having me along to that. It was really an education and inspiring and really, really fun. So thank you. You're waiting on the Patreon plug. Here it is. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a Patreon page for this podcast. It is patreon.com/John Huff Podcast, where for the low membership fee of $5 a month, you can support the show. Say it with me. I don't want to run ads on this program. Ads on podcasts drive me freaking crazy. I don't like it. And so I've opted to go the Patreon route in lieu of that. $5 a month. You can think of it as tipping me $1.25 for every episode I do. Don't want to do the Patreon? That's okay. I have the merch, john-huff.com/shop. I got your t-shirts. I got your mugs. If you don't want to do that, that's okay too. That's fine. Word of mouth, kids, still the best advertising. Particularly, social media is going downhill fast. I see lots of complaints on Instagram. I see lots of complaints on Threads about reach. Reach is just not happening. And now there are rumblings that Meta, our overlords, are beginning to introduce memberships for, say, Instagram, and they're fundamentally reach memberships. So it's like if you want your content seen by anybody, you're going to have to sign up for a tier of membership, which is more than the $5 I'm asking for Patreon, by the way. And so it's like, okay, now they're making it so you've kind of got to pay in order for this platform to be of any value to you. And it just becomes frustrating. And the temptation, especially as I read on Threads, for example, aren't anywhere really. Just the psychotic negativity that you cannot avoid out there. Just the levels of toxicity. And some of it's bots, and some of it's just people being paid to be a-holes online to stir people up. And again, it's this anger that draws people on the platforms and keeps them there. It's a freaking cesspool a lot of the time. And as a method of advertising your program or your art or your music or anything, it's really, really ineffective a lot of the time and becoming less effective, I think. And so word of mouth, right? Tell a friend who tells a friend who tells a friend. I heard it from a friend who heard it from a friend. Heard it from another friend. You've been messing around. Telling your friends who like podcasts about my podcast is very, very much appreciated. Ratings and reviews are very, very much appreciated. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thanks for everybody who's just telling somebody about the show or sharing my little teasers when I do them. And signing up for Patreon and looking at my merch and whatever. I just appreciate the support. If you want to help me grow the show, and I hope you do, and I appreciate it, just tell somebody. Please, as King's X said, go tell somebody. Patreon.com/John Huff Podcast, john-huff.com/shop. And I so appreciate all of your support so far. I thought I was in trouble, man. I thought I was going to get about 14 minutes of an episode this week. Here we are. I am, if nothing else, loquacious. Can't leave without giving you some music, and it was a struggle, man. I don't know how many freaking songs I've sampled since last Wednesday. Like 30, maybe 35. And that's not to say they weren't good, but if something's going to appear on this show, it's got to really grab me. So I hear lots of songs that I think are pretty cool, but it's like, do I want to spend the time talking about that? Not really. And then I hear some that are like, 9, not for me. And that tends to come down to the vocals. not into the screamy vocals. I like screeching vocals. I don't like screaming vocals. For me, there's a distinction. So I was beginning to give up hope on being able to share new music with you this week. And then I ran across a brand new single by somebody called Spider Blush. That's all one word, lowercase, Spider Blush. And what is Spider Blush? Well, Spider Blush is an artist from Tampa, Florida, a poet and a songwriter. And she is, I'm going to call it indie pop. I'm going to call it indie pop. All right. It's got an indie rock vibe, but a very pop sensibility. What that means is it's very melodic, right? And it's very got a chorus that is pop to me, but it's kind of crunching indie rock guitars, drums, etc. I think maybe that's how you define that. Brand new song called Favorite. And I just dig it. I don't know what else to say about this. Somebody please update the copyright laws that were written 120 friggin' years ago about sheet music so that we can play some of this music on our podcast without getting canceled or arrested. A very ethereal vocal. She's very young. She's like 22 years old, just beginning to come into her career as a recording artist and a live performer. Ethereal vocals on these kind of crunchy pop guitars, but a very melodic song. And it's one of those ones that if you see the band perform it live, it's bouncy. All right? So they hit the chorus on this song, Favorite, and you bounce. You bounce up and down. It's one of those songs, okay? I know you've been at a club before. I know you've been to see an indie rock band and people start jumping and bouncing. It's one of those. Favorite by Spider Blush. And I think live, it's probably really, really great, right? These chords, how do I describe these chords in the chorus? There's a certain dissonance in them, right? It's chunky. I think there's a pinky on an interesting string. If I was video, maybe I could demonstrate this for you. But chunky guitars and bouncy up and down kind of melody and hooky chorus. It's just really, really good. And I think live would be great. She has an interesting voice. It's very understated, very ethereal. She's not going balls out. Like a lot of the music that I've talked about recently, things like Issa, for example. I mean, these are rock songs, hard rock songs, metal songs, and those singers are going all freaking out. And I love that. I love the power that a singer can generate on a song like that. And I'm amazed by it because I can't freaking do it. I wish I could, but I can't. At the same time, I can also really, really love an understated ethereal vocal that's evocative and moody and lends this emotive air to the song. Spider Blush does that, right? This is not a jump and yell your head off song. This is a very bouncy and we're singing gently kind of a song, but it's really hooky, really catchy, and it saved my freaking bacon this week because I had really nothing to talk about musically that I could really get behind. I can Favorite by Spider Blush from the Ways Parted EP. I will put that on the John Huff Podcast referenced on the Podcast 2024 playlist on Spotify. Go check that out, man. There's some really great stuff on there that you probably have not heard. Might find your new favorite song, might find your new favorite artist. This has gone further than I wanted it to. I feared it would be 14 minutes, and I hoped it would be less than 45. Need to cut these down because I just don't have the time to edit them. We keep the standards high around here, kids. I'm going to go. I'm going to shut up, shutting up. I want to thank you for listening this far. I want to thank Jeff Burrows. I want to thank Fresh Breath. I want to thank whoever served me up a green, possibly peppermint tea with 2 sugar, possibly sweetener, which I did not enjoy, but gave me a hook into this episode, and I always appreciate a good hook. Hope you're well. Remember, kids, good things happen when you put yourself out there, you know? You put yourself out there one day, and then 13 or 14 years later, you're on stage with Jeff Burrows playing the drums. Having a moment, and ain't that just life? Hope you're well. Take care. And hey, kids, I'll check you later. Yeah. Ain't nobody confusing me for Jeff Martin or Jeff Burrows. But we do our best, kids. We do our best.